Hey, it's Todd Daniele, and today we're going to talk about inflation. Not the economy, the CG kind. So, for inflation, I found that the weapon of choice for me as a modeler slash look dev artist is ZBrush, because I don't have the overhead of having to worry about doing huge simulations or dealing with cloth modifiers and forces. I can just make something that looks as if it's been inflated. And that's what the goal is today. So I'm going to show you several examples. We're going to start out with something which I have on screen. This is like a space frame. And I had seen a while ago, as I'm sure a lot of people had when they were sending the Mars rover up, they had animations showing that when it would land on Mars, there was like this airbag deployment system that was like in a steel cage. And it just seemed like a good example to show. So we have the space frame, and let's just get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to append a sphere, and you can see it's intersecting with the space frame right now. I'm going to Alt and click on it to make it active. You saw it change color. And a couple things I want to do. First thing I want to do is hit R, and I want to scale that down a little bit. And I want to look at it from all angles and make sure it's not intersecting with the space frame. So just do that really quick. Looks good. Now the second thing I want to do, if I hit Shift and F, you can see on the wireframe view, it's a typical CG sphere. It has a pole at the top and at the bottom, and I don't want that. I want like more of a quad mesh. So in ZBrush, we luckily have Z Remesher, and what we're going to do is turn off Adapt. We're going to turn the polygon count to same, and we're just going to run the default algorithm. So we're going to say Z Remesh, and as we can see, not really any poles. There's some not bad geo, but not perfect geo, but it's all quads, and that's what I want. So that's a good starting point for what we're going to do today. Next thing we're going to do is get into the dynamics. So I'm going to just take the dynamics tab, and I'm going to dock it over here so that we have it ready to go. And we'll talk about the settings in a second, and we'll get on with the simulation. Okay, let's take a look at the settings. So in the top here under dynamics, we have simulation, iteration, strength, and firmness. What we're going to do is turn the firmness down to 1 from 2. Right now it's set to onbrushed. I'm going to turn that off for the time being. We're going to return to that later. And we're going to leave floor collision on for this example because I want it to feel as if it inflated but had a ground plane that it also pushed against as it inflated. So we're going to leave that on, and we'll turn off gravity, and we'll turn on inflate. Okay, and then the next thing I want to do is just come to collision volume, click on it, hit recalc, and with the resolution that we're currently at, we're going to run a simulation. So I'm going to just say run simulation, and I'm going to stop it pretty quickly. You can see it started to intersect with the mesh and started to get some pressure against it. That's what I wanted. And now what we're going to do is just give it a little more information to deal with. So in ZBrush, we have dynamic subdiv, which is going to divide the mesh in appearance, but it's not actually applied. So you can see we still have a very low poly count. And what we're going to do is leave that at 2, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say run the simulation, and we get a little more inflation, but what I'm finding is it's not enough inflation in one big swoop. So what I want to do now is go up here, and it's at 1. I'm going to turn it up to like 6, somewhere around 6. All right, 6.5. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to click recalc just in case. I'm going to say run simulation, and I'm going to stop it. And you can see it actually filled in the volume a bit better, and it's starting to pinch and things where it's intersecting and hitting that frame, which is what we want. So I'm going to do it one more time. Let's just see if, yeah, there we go. We get a little more, and now it's starting to balloon and like have tension and expansion in certain areas, which is really kind of nice. And what I want to do now is I'm going to take the dynamic subdivision and I'm going to apply it. And you can see we have 3 actual subdivisions now, and the poly count jumped. And I'm going to add one more subdivision. And then I'm going to just click recalc. Just as a precaution, I do that. I'm not sure that it's a completely necessary step. And then we're going to just say run simulation again, and be prepared to either hold down the escape key or click run simulation to stop it, because you don't want to do one big chunk of inflation. So you can see I'm getting a message. simulation skipped mesh density is higher than specified max simulation points. And what that means is this value right here is at 250, but our poly count is at 435. So if I come up here to like 500 or so and run and hit escape, there we go. So now I feel like that's a good volume. And we even have some little folds here. I'm happy with like the look of that right now, but now is the step where we'll take some of the cloth brushes and we'll actually enhance that effect. Okay, so in my opinion, what would look pretty natural and look correct to me would be that, like what's happening here, we get these pinch lines where there's a bit of compression and then a lot of inflation. So what we're going to use is a cloth brush, and I particularly like the cloth nudge. So that's what I'm going to use right now for this example. And we're going to talk about these settings again. We want to have on brushed on because we're using a brush obviously to do this. I'm going to change the size of the brush a little bit, make it a little bit bigger. And then if we leave on inflate, I'm going to show you just so we see the problem with that. If we leave on inflate, we get this kind of pillowing. We don't want that to happen. So I'm going to undo that. We're going to turn off inflate. And now we have the nudge brush just working as like a deformation sort of add folds kind of brush. So that's what we want. And now what we have to do is just add little hits where we want some detail. And I'll say that for me, what feels natural and looks natural is like these corners, there would be a lot of compression and then a lot of expansion. I like to take the brush and I'm going to move outward from this corner. So I'm going to take it, I'm going to click, I'm going to wiggle that, I'm going to keep it clicked down, I'm going to wiggle it a little bit. And you see I get these folds here on both sides of that fold. So the frame actually made folds on both sides. I'm working right now on the outside and I like the look of that. And the poly count, you can see a little bit of staggering or a little bit of pixelation in the geometry, but I'm not worried about that. You can always hold down shift and use the smooth brush and tap. I usually tap with if I'm using a tablet just to get like a small amount, or you can do it on a layer as well. So what I'm going to do is treat all these corners the same way. I'm going to come to the corner, I'm going to pull outward and wiggle a little bit until I get something that looks and feels natural. And remember that if it doesn't look natural to you, then the viewer is going to feel the same. So probably not a whole lot of reference for something like this, but you can find, I'm sure there's something you can find that would mimic this sort of design and feel. And it's important to really try to convey something realistic. That's all I could say. That's what we're paid to do as professionals, or if we're not professionals, that's what we want in our portfolio. So again, I'm coming from the corner and pulling out and I'm wiggling a little bit. It feels too harsh on the outside, so I just tap and fade that in a little bit. And we're just going to go around the whole mesh and do that kind of treatment. Okay? So I'm going to stop and I'm going to just continue on this path and show you the end result. Okay, I'm a little further along than I was when I stopped the video, and you can see I added in lots of little folds towards the corners, some sagging, things like that. And that's all done with the dynamic simulation. So that looks good. If you wanted to, you could certainly go in and grab a regular brush like standard or whatever brushes you prefer to use, and you can paint in even more, because if you're doing look dev, you can really take free reign with whatever you're doing and, you know, just go to town. I mean, there is no restriction on what you're going to do if you're just doing like look dev or kind of blocking out a mesh for the purposes of having it look valid. So there's standard brush, couple simple strokes, a little bit of fading with the smooth brush. You can do that. You can also just, if you want to do clay buildup, use the drag rectangle and find like a fold kind of alpha with folds in it. You can do that as well. So I had bought a set of alphas a while ago that have some cloth alphas. I can't remember exactly where I got them. But anyway, I'm just going to take one of these. And if I come in here now, I can always add a layer. So I can adjust it as much as I want to as well. So pop on a new layer. And then I can just, with the drag rectangle and that alpha, pull that out. And that might be too much for this example, but if you wanted it to use that kind of detail, it's fine. And then the good thing about using this layer is that you can then take it back a little bit, soften it. You know, like I reduced the amount quite a bit, and then I can add a new layer if I want to and soften these hard edges, and you get additional detail. So simulation is a base, additional methods or brushes and alphas to create more detail, and you get a decent looking result. So that's the first example, and for the next example, we're going to try something slightly different. So for the second example, I got a couple images here to show you. I have this guy, you know who he is. I searched Google and I just searched for Mario free 3D model, and I came across on Sketchfab this particular model. You can see the user who created it, Matthias H. And I thought it would be a good example to show. Let me just get rid of this for you guys. What's going on here, which is in America, we have the Macy's parade and they have these inflatable balloons. And if you look at it closely, like there's puckering and folding in lots of areas. These things are gigantic. There's like 50 people holding all these ropes. And I think if you have a job or a desire to make something like this, and you have a basic character like we have, the one we downloaded, you could do it pretty quickly, especially for previs. If you had to previs this, there was a great commercial, I think it's from 2008. It's called Coca-Cola It's Mine, if you go to YouTube and look for that, where the balloons kind of escape and start bouncing off the buildings. Well, anyway, I think this is a good example of how to quickly do something like that. You could also do a more detailed version. I'm just trying to give you an overview of how you could approach it in ZBrush with Dynamics, since that's the topic of the day. So here we go. You can see the polygroups, and you can see he's triangulated, and I don't particularly care for that. Fixing the mesh may work, but I found that on this particular example, if I welded, it still had some issues. So just to show you how it works, I'm going to Dynamesh it. I'm going to put the value to 256 right there. And I'm going to say groups to keep the groups the way they are. I'm going to Dynamesh it. And you can see we have 137,000 polygons. And it's a little faceted. So if we go to deformation, I'm going to run a polish with a value of 2. And it cleans it up, and there we go. So now, still have the polygroups, and this is pretty quick and simple. There are some little issues. Again, this is not a perfect model. We're just going to do an example to show the workflow. So what I'm going to do is come over here. Firmness still at 1 from the previous example. These are both off, on masked, on brushed. We're going to leave floor collision on. Inflate. I'm going to just do a value of let's just type in 2. And we can run that. Now, I would suggest, what I like to do is if the mesh isn't too heavy, when I hit run simulation, I have my finger on the escape key and I kind of tap it to try to stop the algorithm. The more dense your mesh is, the longer the delay. So if you have like a really dense mesh, you're going to need to hold that key and hope for the best. So that said, let's do it. I'm going to run simulation and hit escape. And you can see we have like some of that wrinkling going on. Now what I want to do also is go to geometry and turn off Dynamesh, because if I do any kind of pulling in the viewport with control held down, it'll re-Dynamesh. I don't want that. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my brush. It's at a decent size. I'm going to hold shift. I'm going to just tap again like we did in the last example to soften some of the details that maybe look a little wonky. I want to keep that stuff right there though. And the ear looks kind of cool. See, this is a little messed up, but that's okay. And already it sort of looks like a balloon. So what I'm going to do next is maybe I'm going to run it one more time, and same deal. I'm going to have my finger on escape, run and hit escape. There we go. And then a few taps where we need to. And you can see it has that tension and that sort of look to the image that I had shown earlier of the minion, where it has some folds. So the other cool thing, I'm going to make a copy of this guy just to have a backup in case it doesn't go the way I want. Let's put it to the top, turn off the second one. The other thing you can do is, because you have polygroups, I'm going to just control shift and click on his mustache, and you can see there's a bunch of items that have the same polygroup. I'm going to control A to select all, control shift to unhide everything. There we go. And now because those are masked, I'm going to turn on masked and leave everything else the way it is. And I'm going to run the simulation. It's only going to affect the masked areas. I'm going to have my finger on escape again. You can see we got a little more volume on his hair, and it feels a little more balloon-like to me. I kind of like the look of it. So you can do that for all the areas you'd like to do it to. Like, let's maybe do the shoes. Maybe his shoes should have a little bit more going on. And I'm going to just do the same thing. And he feels more like a balloon now. Okay, so now with that said, as we did earlier, we can go in and use this nudge brush, change this to on brushed, turn off inflate. And if we go to certain areas of the mesh and we wiggle that brush around and then do some tapping to soften, we can get more wrinkles and get that look that we want so badly of the actual inflated balloon. I would say his nose is a good place to maybe have a little something going on. Soften it up. You can see just those few simple steps. What did that take? 2-3 minutes, and we have something that looks. You could pre-visit the commercial I referenced with something like a few characters like this, and be ready to go. You know, like, or if you had a good quality model, you could sculpt, project the normals onto it. There's so many things you could do with this, but it's just really to show you like a look dev approach or a pre-visi kind of approach to this. I'm going to do one last example, which is something I've seen. I think Michael Pavlovich did examples like this, but I'm going to show you one more little inflation trick. Okay, for the next example, I have a plane I subdivided to 5 subdivisions. I'm going to use a mask, and I'm going to use the inflate to do some deformation based on a mask. So I'm using clay buildup. You can use any brush, but I'm just using that one. I have a drag rectangle as the stroke, and this alpha, which is a pattern I had downloaded somewhere a while ago or bought on Gumroad. And I'm going to just hold down Control to mask, and I'm going to drag out the mask. And you can see that it's blurry, and I don't want that. So that's this setting right here. If you hold down Control, you see the focal shift is at 0. You also see that in the brush, the yellow rings, there's 2 different sizes. The inner one is the brush size, and the outer one is the fall off. I want to make them the same, so I'm going to put the focal shift down to -100, and you can see that they're now the same. And if I drag, the mask is now crisp. So now that I have that, I'm going to run a simulation. Unmasked is checked. Floor collision doesn't really matter, but I'm going to leave it on. Inflate set to 2. I'm going to hold the escape key. I'm going to run the simulation and get out of it pretty quickly. And you can see it made, where it was masked, it made some kind of detail. And this is great for if you wanted to do like leather upholstery for a car or a boat. I've used it for exactly that. That does a good job. So that's one way to do it. I'm going to just undo all of this. And now you can see if I have it on masked, it happened within the mask. If I turn that off and run it again, it now happens outside of the mask. And there's definitely a use for that as well, just to show you that you can use either one. I'm going to undo that a few times. Any alpha will work. You can do that with any alpha, and you need a little density to do it, obviously, but that's the first case. Now for the second case, I'm going to just take that plane. I'm going to drop down the subdivisions, delete the higher really quick. Z modeler brush. And what you can do is you can also do polygroups as we did earlier. So I'm going to go to QMesh. I'm going to just say polygroup, polyloop. And for anyone that's done this before, you select, you go to, you'll see the square highlight. That means I'm on polygon. And you see that little orange line above my cursor. That's telling me the direction that it'll do it. So there we go. I did that one. I'm just going to randomly do a few of these. Okay, and then I'll do maybe one going the other direction again, one going the same direction. Okay, so now what we can do is, if we divide the mesh, and then we isolate that polygroup, mask it, the same thing would apply. Based on the topology that I just masked, if I put on unmasked and run simulation, we get the same effect. as you can see. Conversely, if we turn off on mask and do it again, same thing that happened before, it's the inverse. So it's just another way that you can use it. So we've covered today using masks, geometry, polygroups, inflation, some of the brushes, some of the workflows. And I think it's a really cool technique to, like I said, previs. If you're not wanting to get involved in doing simulations or you're just trying to get something to look good for a client approval, this is a great quick technique to get that done. If you try the technique and apply it to something of your own that you feel would benefit from it, maybe a costume that wrinkles or like a tight belt on a costume that's overflowing or something, I think there's plenty of uses for this. I hope it was helpful. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe and like below. And if you feel that it was really helpful, you can always buy me a coffee. Thanks so much. I'm Todd Daniele, and I'll see you in the next video.